All right, folks, thank you for your patience. We're going to get going. I assume there's going to continue to be people trickling in. Our apologies again for the confusion between 6 and 6:30. And also, although we weren't the designers or we weren't the university infrastructure folks that did it, our confusion for this really strange layout of a building to get to this room. We, because of cutbacks on the university campus, rooms available in the evenings now are very, very limited, and you've got to take what you can get. So it took us a while to find this one. We jumped on it when we found it, and now we're trying to figure out how to make it work with the various struggles. So I do want to welcome you all to our town hall event tonight, Fair Taxes, Affordable Futures, Building an Economy for Everyone. My name is Ricardo Acuna. I'm the Executive Director of the Parkland Institute, and also a board member of Canadians for Tax Fairness. So I'm kind of wearing two hats up here tonight. I want to begin our event by respectfully acknowledging that we're meeting today on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Papastew, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, language, and cultures continue to influence our community today. This land has always been a gathering place, and today we gather to respectfully share knowledge, learn from one another, and celebrate and contribute to the millennia of learning that have occurred in this place. It's important to acknowledge the land that we're on because we're all bound to the treaties. We are all responsible for upholding the treaty's promises and commitments, and we're especially responsible for calling out and challenging those who would see its word and spirit broken and violated. So in that spirit, let's begin our event tonight and have conversations and do some sharing. Tonight's event was put together by Canadians for Tax Fairness with organizing partners the Parkland Institute, Councillor Michael Janz, Oxfam Canada, Public Interest Alberta, and Common Horizons Edmonton. Funding support was provided by the National Union of Public and General Employees, NUPGE, the Canadian Labour Congress, the United Nurses of Alberta, the Edmonton and District Labour Council, and the Alberta Federation of Labour. We thank all of the sponsors for helping us make this event possible. So this idea of a series of town hall events across the country was conceived of by Canadians for Tax Fairness as a way of sharing research and genuinely engaging Canadians on discussions about the connections between our broken and unfair tax system, the affordability crisis we've all been facing, and the grotesque accumulation of ever greater amounts of wealth by the richest of the rich in this country. And most importantly, what it will take to fix it all. The goal was not just to share information and engage in discussion, but also highlight groups that are campaigning and taking action across the country to turn things around. This is the first in-person town hall of the series, and we're thrilled that you're all here with us, and we're thrilled that they're hosting it in Edmonton. So here's what tonight's going to look like very quickly. We'll start out by hearing from a few speakers, including the folks from Canadians for Tax Fairness, then have some time for questions and discussions interspersed with a few more local speakers who will tell us about the tremendous work and activities that they're engaged in. So to get us started tonight, I'd like to invite up Nirvana Mushtaba from Oxfam Canada to give us a big picture and tell us about some of Oxfam's latest data and information from their new Billionaires Report, and speak a little bit about gender equity as well. So Nirvana?
Thank you, Ricardo. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. I would like to thank our partner, Canadians for Tax Fairness, and our partners, allies, and sponsors of the event in providing the opportunity for Oxfam Canada to speak with you all today. Oxfam is a global movement of people working to end injustice and poverty. Oxfam Canada is an affiliate of the International Oxfam Confederation. We're networked in 87 countries as part of the global network for the movement of change. Our mission is to build lasting solutions to solution to poverty and injustice, focusing on improving the lives and promoting the rights of women and girls. Our office is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of Anishinaabe Algonquin First Nation. Inequality is not inevitable. It is a political action, or rather inaction, I would say. While 3.8 million people across Canada live in poverty, in 2024, billionaire wealth grew by $309 million a day. Rising costs of food and housing hit women and gender diverse people the hardest, especially single mothers and lone parent households, which are usually women-led. The wealth of Canada's 65 billionaires could carpet most of Vancouver, about 93%, in $50 bills. Yet poverty keeps growing. Extreme wealth and power don't just fuel inequality. They weaken democracy and slow climate action. Tax rules favor the ultra-rich the most, of whom are men, while the underfunded social services leave women and gender diverse people behind. Without change, Canada's feminist agenda will fall short. To build a fairer economy, we need a permanent wealth tax, higher taxes on super profits by the corporations, and a crackdown on tax evasion. These bold tax reforms could raise over $409 billion to tackle poverty, funding healthcare, housing, childcare, and for those who need it the most. The system should work for all, not just for the super rich. Thank you. I'd like to pass the mic on and invite Katrina and Silas. Thank you.
Can we try and speak really close into the mic?
Oh, okay. Okay.
How's this? All right. Thank you so much, Nirvana, for the interesting presentation. Nirvana at the back table has got an infographic that Oxfam Canada has done up with all that information on it, which people should really take out and share around as far as you can. So Silas Xuereb is Canadians for Tax Fairness's research and policy analyst. Some of you may have had the opportunity to see Silas when he presented at the Parkland conference this past November on some of his research. He did a fantastic job, and we're glad to have him back in Edmonton, and we're even gladder that this time he's brought a colleague with him, Katrina Miller, who is Canadians for Tax Fairness's executive director. So tonight they'll be highlighting some of C4TF's latest work and sharing some of their latest research. So welcome, Katrina and Silas.
Thank you. Huh? Sorry, but we don't have to change anything. You're the first slide. So we just, thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. This is my first time in Edmonton, so I'm really excited to be in Edmonton. Woohoo! And it's like the sun came out for me today, and it's beautiful. The weather was wonderful.
Hold the mic by your hand so you can detach it.
Do you want me to detach it?
Yeah.
You want me to go there? How's that? Is that better? All right. All right. Look, you know, what you've just heard from Oxfam helps us understand that what we face in terms of wealth inequality and the issues that we have with the tax system, basically aiding and abetting that wealth inequality, is at a global scale. But we want to talk a bit about how that affects us at a Canadian level and how it affects you at a local level here in Edmonton and Alberta. That's the point of tonight's conversation. Because I think all of us understand that with the pandemic, since the pandemic, we've been falling behind, that our wages, for the most part, haven't kept up with rates of inflation. And there's been some parts of that inflation, certain sectors like food and housing, that have made it absolutely impossible to make ends meet, and many of us are wondering if we're ever going to get ahead. Now, you know, this issue that's been going on for us for a few years now isn't felt by everyone, because although many of us lost out in so many tragic ways during the pandemic, there were some who gained during the pandemic. And that's the other thing I think we've come to understand as a community, is that there were gains made by corporations during the pandemic. In fact, we saw corporations increase their profits by about 50% during the pandemics. In 2023 alone, corporate Canada brought in $644 billion more in profit than they did in 2019. And where does that profit go? Well, it went to increasing the income and wealth of the top 1%, who we also saw rise during that period of time while everyone else was stagnating. And so this issue, we understand, has been, in some parts, a function of the pandemic and the ongoing crises that we faced. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that this is some sort of unintentional, unpredictable consequence of these crises. The research that we're coming out with next week, we're giving you a sneak peek, shows quite clearly how the last 4 decades of our public policy has led us to this point. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague here, Silas, who's going to walk us through the research that he's done and the report that we're coming out with next week.
Thanks for setting that up, Katrina. Yeah, so where I want to start tonight is the last point that Katrina made, right? That the affordability concerns and this crisis that we've been talking about for the past couple of years, affordability concerns got worse in the past few years since the pandemic, right? But really this is the product of longer term trends that have been going on in the economy for about 40 years at this point. And as Katrina said, this is the result of explicit policy choices that have been made over the past 40 years. So let's start with taking a look at economic growth, right? This is what policymakers are often talking about, right? We need to grow our economy. We hear this all the time, right? A lot of policy is focused on achieving growth in GDP, especially real, just means inflation-adjusted GDP, right? And so if we look at real GDP per capita since 1982, it's grown quite a lot, right? This looks pretty good. This suggests that we have 70% more real income in Canada per person in 2022 than we did in 1982. However, I'm going to argue that this is not a great metric that we should be using for understanding how real Canadians, working Canadians' living standards are changing, and that we need to change the way we talk about the economy to not just be focused on economic growth. So if we add to this slide a different metric, which I'm calling the real inflation-adjusted, right, after-tax income of half of Canadians, right? So the 50% of Canadians who earn the least money each year. And now this line looks very different. So over the past 40 years, the real incomes of half of Canadians have grown by less than 30%. So only 40% of the growth in GDP has gone to this bottom 50%. Sorry, the bottom 50% real incomes have only grown 40% as much as GDP per capita. And so if economic growth was equally distributed, right, if we all had equally benefited from this growth, these two lines should intersect. There should be no difference, right, if everyone is equally benefiting from growth. But what we're going to see is that economic growth over the past 40 plus years has really been benefiting those at the top. If economic growth had been equally distributed over the past 40 years, the bottom 50% of tax filers would have $6,500 more in their pocket each year right now, right? That's about 30% of their annual income that they've missed out on, right? So why has there been such a divergence between economic growth and the real affordability, the real incomes of half of Canadians? Well, the first issue is that the market incomes, right, so this is income that mostly comes from people's jobs, but also includes retirement incomes, EI, stuff like that. They've actually grown less than the cost of living over the past 40 years for these 50% of Canadians. So while the Consumer Price Index, right, is a typical measure of the cost of living, it has grown by 175% since 1982. The real income of half of Canadians from market sources has only grown by 150%. Now, there has been some relief, I suppose you could say. The after-tax incomes of this bottom 50% have increased a little bit more than the cost of living over the past 40 years. That's why we did see a small increase on that last page. So this is thanks to new government transfers that have been introduced, like the Canada Child Benefit, that have really benefited low-income and working Canadians. But where has the rest of this growth gone? Well, unsurprisingly, unsurprisingly, most of this growth, the rest of the economic growth, this missing economic growth, has basically entirely gone to the top 1%, right? So even the next 49% of Canadians, the middle class, upper middle class Canadians, have done barely better than inflation over the past 40 years. But the top 1%, their incomes have increased 5 times, 3 times as fast as inflation over the past 40 years. And if we look at the top 0.01%, which is just about 3,000 people each year, who have average incomes of $11 million per year, their incomes have grown 9.5 times, 950% since 1982. 6 times faster than the average market incomes have increased for half of Canadians. So this is why economic growth does not necessarily raise living standards or ease affordability pressures. It really matters where this income is growing. It is totally possible for the economy to grow and none of that income to be passed through to low-income and working Canadians. Next slide. There's one more, I think. So the other aspect of the affordability crisis that we've talked a lot about in the past few years, right, has been essential goods, right? The other thing that we miss when we look at just these big picture measures of the cost of living and income is the fact that not all prices matter the same, right? Some goods, if the price of your housing or your food increases, that's going to matter a lot more to people and their feelings of financial security than if, you know, the price of alcohol or the skiing trips goes up, right? But both of these different types of goods factor the same into indexes like the Consumer Price Index. But during the pandemic, we saw, you know, food prices increasing, right? We saw companies like Loblaws get targeted because their profit margins had doubled during the pandemic, and we saw rents skyrocket, right, as rental companies took advantage of a tight rental market to jack up prices. But again, just like the capturing of growth by the top 1%, this isn't really a new phenomenon. Prices of food and shelter have been raising faster than other prices for over 20 years. If we look at housing prices in particular, right, an index of housing prices has increased by about 10 times since 1982, right? The only people whose incomes has increased at that same rate are the top 0.01%. For half of Canadians, their after-tax incomes have increased only 1/4 the rate. So, this is reflected in people's budgets, right? So shelter costs, which were less than 1/4 of people's budgets in 1982, now are nearly 1/3, over 31% of the household budget is taken up by shelter costs now. So this affordability crisis that we're witnessing now, right, it's getting worse, but it's been getting worse for a long, long time. And corporations were able to take advantage of the power that they've gained during the pandemic in order to profit, to capture that hundreds of billions of excess profits during the pandemic that Katrina mentioned. But this is due to, they were able to do this because of long-term shifts in power from workers to corporations. This includes, you know, the free trade agreements, which have often resulted more in investor protection, right? This involves the privatization of public services and previously crown corporations, undermining labor movements, and cutting corporate taxes, right? And so all these policies we can think of as broadly policies in the line of the ideology of neoliberalism, right? And these policies are sold to the public that they will accelerate economic growth and increase efficiency. But really what they've done is increase the price of essential goods and funnel a lot of the economic growth to just the top 1%. So we need to act fast, or this pandemic profiteering could come back now that these tariffs that we're dealing with right now are going to give corporations another opportunity to jack up prices as people are confused and seeing price increases. And with that, I'll leave it to Katrina to talk about some more specific policies.
So we'll take this into our zone as an organization. It's funny because we work on taxes, but that really means that we work on economic justice. and need to understand taxes as a frame of economic justice. So how do taxes play in all this? Well, let's just take a look at what's happened in corporate taxation and profiteering over the same period of time. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a pretty stark reality that since 1988 to now, basically the orange line is the effective tax rate, corporate tax rate, which starts to dive precipitously. And the purple line is the profit margin that starts to go up. So we can see that there's really this stark correlation here with falling taxes that then increases or leads to increasing corporate profit. And this was intentional, right? This was intentional. The idea was is you drop their taxes, they profit more, and we all win because of that. And this is certainly intentional in Alberta, as I understand as well. And I'm sure that we'll hear more about that from Ricardo. But this slide shows what's happened around the statutory corporate tax rate in Alberta. Has had the same fall since 1970. It was at 52.4% at one point. And now it's fallen to 23%. And that's just the statutory rate. That's the legislated rate. That's before they get all of their deductions and tax breaks and tax avoidance schemes. So in Canada, the average rate is actually more like 15% as an effective rate. That's incredibly low. You think about your tax bill and what your effective rate is compared to these large corporations, and it's infuriating, right? Next slide. And this idea that these profits would somehow create productivity and growth has also been shown not to be true, to be totally mythological. Because we can see during this period of time, which is just in the last 15 years, that as corporate profits, which is the yellow line, go up, the corporate rate of investment in capital expenditures absolutely flatlines. So where is it going? Well, we know where it's going. It's going to more dividend payouts. It's going to share buybacks. It's going to increasing through mergers and their market share so they can monopolize markets and thereby gain greater profit and power. And so this is the problem we come up against. This corporate profiting, empowering, and lack of taxation leads to this reality, which is where we tie back into affordability. In 1988, the total tax burden shared by us as individuals, so that's when we take all the taxes, direct and indirect, and portion it to what it means for us in our budget, was about equal between the medium and the top 1%. Top 1% paid a little bit more, right? That's in 1988. In 2022, the top 1% are enjoying about half the tax burden as the average individual, because their taxes have fallen and their profit, their income has risen. And so, you know, we at Canadians for Tax Fairness right now are dealing with a massive backlash to taxation, right? Everyone wants a tax cut. And it's because it's reflecting a very real truth that for the average individual, for average working class Canadian, they are holding right now the biggest tax burden. The taxes have been shifted onto the working class, and we need to rebalance the system in order to shift it back where it belongs. I'm going to hand it back to Ricardo now, who's going to tell us a little bit about some of the local context.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Katrina and Silas. We're going to hand the mic back to them in a little while to have a little chat about solutions and do some question and answer and discussion. But before that, I get to talk a bit about Alberta. And I want to start by talking about a report that we did at Parkland back in 2008, a report called Saving for the Future. And in this report, this was in 2008 when we were still at the height of the boom just before the bottom fell out of it, right? Just before the bottom fell out of the economy worldwide in 2008. And what we laid out in this report was a plan for weaning ourselves off fossil fuel revenues over 5 years and replacing those revenues with fair taxation. Had we followed that plan and actually started saving 100% of our savings over the course of 5 years, we'd have well over $150 billion in the Heritage Savings Fund today that we could draw interest from and help shield us from things like crazy people tariffs coming at us from other parts of the world. We'd be less dependent on oil and gas revenues, and we'd be panicking a little less. So last year, when Premier Smith announced that she was ready to get serious about savings and was going to build our Heritage Trust Fund to between $250 billion and $500 billion between now and 2050, got a little excited. We thought, yes, she's finally pulled our old report off the shelf and is ready to implement it. But that excitement didn't last long because it became very clear that her intent was to somehow accomplish this feat of saving all that money without fixing the tax system and without raising royalties. In fact, her government has just moved in the most recent provincial budget released last week to do the exact opposite of those things. She's cutting personal taxes and looking for ways to funnel more public money to backstop the oil and gas industry, especially in the face of the tariff war. So here's a snapshot of what Alberta looks like today, just after a provincial budget. Our education and post-secondary systems are in crisis and getting worse. Our healthcare system is in crisis and getting worse. Social supports, housing, mental health, addiction, all in crisis and getting worse. Our government is in the midst of a huge corruption scandal for their work behind the scenes to hand over ridiculous amounts of money to their friends via the privatization and outsourcing of our healthcare system and procurement of medicine and supplies, all in exchange, apparently, for box seats during the Oilers playoff run last year. Budget 2025 presents Albertans with a deficit of $5 billion and bumps the provincial debt up to $43 billion. I'm not usually one to complain about deficits and debt, but I think it's particularly noteworthy in this event. What funding increases there were failed to keep up generally with inflation and population growth, never mind even beginning to address the multiple crises that I just talked about. And of course, for some ridiculous reason, in the midst of all these crises, a budget deficit and a budget debt and a threat of tariffs from the South, our Premier decides that this would be a great time to introduce a further tax cut to the tune of some $1.2 billion in cost to the provincial treasury. Now, in a sense, the way they implemented this tax cut is actually in response to something that we've been arguing for a very long time, and that is to make the tax system more progressive, right? Of course, we always meant to make it more progressive by adding more tax brackets at the middle and the top. They've decided to make it more progressive by adding another tax bracket at the bottom, which would essentially mean a 2% cut in taxes on the first $60,000 anybody earns. As always, this benefits the highest income earners way more than the lowest income earners. So, interestingly, the government maintains in their budget that they still believe it can grow our savings to over $250 billion over the next 25 years. For the record, I also still believe we can grow our savings to over $250 billion in the next 25 years, but certainly not the way the government is going to do it, which is on the backs of the poor and our public services. Albertans are currently undertaxed to the tune of about $20 billion. That's how much more we'd raise if we implemented the tax system of the next lowest taxed province, which is BC. It would be $22 billion if we emulated Saskatchewan, $23 billion more if we emulated Ontario, and a whopping $32 billion if we emulated Quebec's tax system. For context, keep that in mind, it's $20 billion that we're undertaxed. For context, the budget projects that Alberta will bring in $17 billion in natural resource revenues this year. Last year it was $21 billion. What that means is that reforming our taxes to match that of the next lowest province would allow us to save 100% of our oil and gas revenues this year and still have $3 billion left over to invest how we pleased. Imagine how much more that would be if we were to add a wealth tax or a super profits tax on top of that reform to the tax system. We could finally be in a place where we eliminate our dependence on oil and gas and at the same time be able to begin investing in fixing our healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social supports. We're getting on to talking about solutions right away. I do just want to touch very quickly on the topic of the tariffs and what Alberta can do with what we've got right now on behalf of those tariffs. And I think the Alberta government right now is missing a huge opportunity by refusing to consider a 15% export tax on oil and gas going to the US. Most of that oil is going to places in the US that have no replacement for Alberta oil. They have to buy it. They can't get oil from anywhere else. So they'll pay the markup if we put an export tax on oil and gas. It would hit Trump where it hurts, and it would provide Alberta with funds that could be used to support the workers and small businesses that will be hurt by the trade war, instead of offering a tax cut that will be largely meaningless for most Albertans. So I'll stop there, move us on to our next speaker, who's going to bring it down even closer to home and talk a little bit about what's happening in the city of Edmonton. So Ward Papastew Councillor Michael Janz, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Janz. I'm the City Councillor for Ward Papastew, which is here where the University of Alberta is located. And of course, welcome to our fantastic guests. Welcome. Thank you for coming to Edmonton. Thank you for coming to share with us and to advocate. And thank you to the sponsors here tonight who have helped make this evening happen. And thank you to Reed from my office, who is helping record all of this for future sharing and distribution, and hopefully clipping it into those Robert Reich-style wonderful educational moments on our dear social media companies. So very shortly in Edmonton, property taxes are going to be mailed out. People will receive a bill for their property, and often will ask why their taxes are going up, why things are changing. And I just want to bring that down. Municipalities have three levers. Number one, user fees. You pay to go to the pool, you pay to climb on the bus, etc. User fees, we know, disproportionately target lower income people, working class people. Number two, property taxes. Property taxes, we know, are regressive. They do not take into account whether it's your first home, your third home, your cabin, etc. There's a flat rate. It doesn't take into account your income. We're very limited in what we can do there. The third lever where we can get revenue is provincial and federal governments. Our budget is around $1 billion in the city of Edmonton, comparing to the provincial budget, which is about $65 billion, and the federal government, which is 500-ish, $500 billion. So we are dealing with, over 1 million people, a quarter of Alberta's population, yet a fraction of the resources to address the problems that are right in your face when we talk about social disorder, when we talk about climate change, when we talk about wildfires, floods, the issues that are happening to you. It is literally on your curb, which is your city council. Now, I'll give you an example. Last year, fuel companies, I just looked, two fossil fuel companies made over $95 billion in the first quarter in profits. Meanwhile, your taxes in Edmonton are going up 1% because our fuel costs are just the overage on our fuel cost was $24 million, which is about a 1% property tax increase. So while they are making enormous profits, who's paying it? Municipalities. We're really thirsty. Those fire engines, those garbage trucks, those buses, they got to drink, right? And so here is a direct line here where more profit here is, what is it? It's downloading onto you here. And that has consequences for us on the tax rate. And then the two biggest costs, affordability hits households in the two biggest ways: your household costs and your transportation costs. And the federal government we've talked about this a lot in the housing crisis conversation since the 90s. They've cut back on social housing and housing initiatives that have kept the market honest, that have helped provide affordable housing for people, especially the people who need it the most, getting out of social housing, etc. And then in transportation, they have woefully fallen short of investing in the buses, the trains, the public transportation systems that would allow people to live car light, car less, save money, more money in your pocket. So there's a number of these domains where the federal government and the provincial government, because of their own neoliberalism and austerity, that trickles down and compounds onto cities, which in turn raises property taxes. And this would be true whether you were hearing an Edmonton City Councillor, a Town of Ponoka Councillor, a Winnipeg City Councillor. This is the story across Canada when we talk with our colleagues. Because of cuts at other levels of government, where it gets downloaded until property taxes, and at some point somebody's got to shovel the snow and we end up paying for it. So what do? Well, first of all, we need to dream bigger. Remunicipalization of public services. We need to think like in the past we had EdTel, we had an ISP, we had local municipal internet. You were not tethered to Shaw or TELUS. You had options. You had abilities here. And there's so many things now that have just become the private domain, whether it's our veterinary services, where you have to go, the Mars Bar company now controls our vet rates, or when you're looking at other core services, we need to have that conversation about how we can make life more affordable through cooperating together at the municipal level. Public services are incredible. It's incredible what we can do when we work together. These are the conversations we need to be having, and funding them with fair taxation through the provincial and federal government. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. All right. So what do we do about all this? I'm going to hand it over to you guys. You've got a mic there. You got to just turn it on. Yep. Perfect. These guys will chat for about 5 minutes, give us their solutions, and then we're gonna open it up for you all to pop in and ask your questions and have some discussion. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start with the obvious one. I'll pass it over to Silas, which is, we've heard a lot for the last 10 years about the idea of a wealth tax, and this idea bears weight because one of the main shifts that's behind what we saw on the slides in terms of the tax burden comes from there being a focus on taxing income and not capital. We need to tax capital again because we need it to work for all of society instead of just being hoarded by very, very few. And that's what happens with the wealth tax. With the wealth tax, you take someone's net wealth above a certain amount. A lot of the proposals out there include the one that we have, says wealth above a net $10 million. So you gotta be pretty rich for this thing to hit you, right? And you do it at 1 or 2% at that level. And then at 20 million, just like we do with graduated income tax, wealth of net 20 million over that, you do it at a higher level. At net 50 million, you do it at a higher level over that. So you put in a graduated wealth tax to get back to taxing capital. And with that, we could bring in $30 billion. Now, this has huge public support. Every time we poll on this, we know that people both understand it and back it. The only problem is they think it can never happen because they think that we can't get the political will. Well, that's what we can't allow to become the narrative. We have to start imagining, as Michael said, we have to think big, we have to dream big, we have to basically call for and demand big moves like this in order to actually change the trend that we're seeing. But it's not just all about personal, individual taxation. So I'm going to hand it over to Silas to talk about corporate taxation.
Sure, yeah. So just as Katrina was alluding to at the end of her talk, and I alluded to at the end of mine, there's a lot more we could do on the corporate taxation side, right? And in particular, in the past 5 years, what we saw during the pandemic, right, was this huge, massive corporate profiteering, corporations increasing prices much more than their costs increase, right? And they were able to do this because there was kind of these supply chain pressures, right? So people kind of expected prices to increase. And that's happening again now, right? With these tariffs that are coming in right now, people are going to be, again, expecting prices to increase. And if we don't do anything, nothing is going to stop corporations from doing the exact same thing once again. And this is now on already higher profit margins. Their profit margins have not come back down to their pre-pandemic levels. They're still higher than they were pre-pandemic. So what we can do is implement a windfall profit tax. So very simply, this just means saying any profit margin that's higher than your profit margin before these taxes go into effect, or we can even say before the pandemic if we want to go that far. We're just taxing that at a very high rate. And this can ensure that corporations have no incentive, right, to increase the prices more than their costs increase, because they're not going to keep that money, right? And maybe this sounds like a crazy idea, but it's not. It's actually been done many, many times before. European countries and the UK did this for the oil and gas sector in the last 5 years, post-pandemic, post-Ukraine-Russia war, when oil prices went through the roof. They all implemented huge excess profits taxes on the oil and gas sector. Canada itself has done this at least twice in its history during both world wars to help fund the war effort. And now that we're facing additional crises again, we need to badly fund a just transition urgently. We should do this again. And another smaller thing we could do, but a more permanent option, could be to increase the general corporate tax rate. As Katrina showed, it's fallen drastically over the past 40 years. And we could introduce a super profits tax that just taxed very large corporations who make over $1 billion in profits a year or something like that. We could tax their profits more because these are the corporations that are able to take advantage of their market power in order to increase prices so much they're not scared, TELUS, Rogers, they're not scared of losing their market share if they increase the cost of your phone plan by $10 a month, right? So we need to put measures in place that discourage them from doing that. And so with that, I'll pass it back.
Awesome. Yeah, and just for, yeah.
Sorry, because I want to wrap it back around to affordability. Because sometimes in the tax fairness conversation, I think people start to think that we're thinking about fair taxes for fair tax sakes. And that's not actually what it's about. Yes, that's what it's about. But it's about us having the revenue and resources in public hands, in democratic control, to do the kinds of investments that we want in our economy and in our communities. Especially at this moment when we're thinking about the sovereignty of our economy, when we're thinking about the sustainability of our economy and our societies, this is the moment when we need to increase the public investment and public power to make these choices. And the only way we're going to really be able to do that is if we figure out how to gain more in tax revenue from the right sources and redistribute some of that power.
Yeah, and I would suggest that in Alberta, it goes beyond that. I mean, in Alberta, absolutely, the super wealth tax, the super profits tax, all of those things need to be applied. But I think in Alberta, it's also true, given the numbers I just talked about, how undertaxed we are, that at least 50% Albertans are not paying enough in taxes. And a substantial reform to the system would see that 50% paying more. Now, don't get me wrong. If these governments are going to continue giving our tax dollars as subsidies to the oil industry, then screw a fair tax system, right? But if there's a commitment to actually invest those dollars in our public services and fix the mess that we're in right now in education and healthcare and social services, then absolutely we need to be improving our taxes. So we're going to pause there for a minute and take some questions and comments from you all, and then I'm going to invite Brad LaFortune to tell us about some of the great stuff that PIA is working on. So if you raise your hand, we'll send Charlene your way with the mic.
Hi, thanks very much for this presentation. I was just wondering what you think at Canadians for Tax Fairness about the idea that the advertising industry is a big problem for affordability, that it actually is like pouring gasoline on the consumption frenzy that we're in. And that it creates false demand in the economy. It makes people want things that they would be wanting if they weren't exposed to the advertising. And so we're beholden to it. We don't fund the access to media publicly, so we have to turn to the advertising funded media. We do it every day. Everyone does it. We're bombarded with these messages, and even if we're not affected ourselves by the advertising, other people in our community are, and when we go to buy things, the increased demand makes the prices go up. So to me, like, this is the way I look at it. I think that it's really sad that we don't have a public service for access to media content. We have to turn to this advertising-funded media, mostly American big tech, and it's the fuel pushing the affordability crisis. It's making prices of goods and services more expensive than the real value of the products. It's like the pump and dump thing. Like everything's been hyped. Do you ever consider that one of our failings is that we don't have a public system? We rely on this foreign advertising funded system.
Do you want to comment first? Because I think there's two comments to have on this. I mean, and one is that there is a sort of surveillance capitalism happening where our data is being mined and then used kind of against us in some ways to ensure that messages and advertising get to us. And the government's not doing a very good job of monitoring that or controlling it or ensuring that the profit that's made from it is redistributed and put towards things like public information system or public media. And I think Canada's tried to act in some ways. We are in the midst of a fight over whether or not we have a digital services tax in Canada on organizations like Amazon. And there's a lot of countries in the world who either have it or want to have it. And the big person standing in the way is Trump and the States, because that's where these companies are housed. That's where what have now been called the broligarchs are housed. And so it's a battle that we have to have. Because one way, and this is through the tax system, there's other ways through regulation that should probably be employed there too, but through the tax system, we can gain back some of that profit and put it towards funding systems that give people other options, give people true public media and news access where they're not berated with advertisement. Something to add, Rob?
The only other thing I'd add quickly is just that, yeah, I think the advertising industry definitely plays a role in increasing demand in that way, but they're not the only reason that prices are rising. Corporations are going to do whatever they can to increase prices whenever they can, right? Their goal is to make profits. So advertising is one way that they can do that, but even if we eliminated that, we would not solve the problem entirely.
And imagine if instead of counter tariffs, we responded to the current trade war by regulating or taxing the heck out of Meta and Twitter and Google for all of the stuff that they're doing in our system right now. I think we've got another question here in the middle.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, in your definition of shelter costs, what are you including in mortgage interest, property taxes, utilities? That's my first question. Let's define that, if you would, please. My other comment is sales tax. I know I'm not from Alberta originally. I've been here since 1980. I've lived in a few other countries. I do not understand for the life of me why the political parties will step up and impose a sales tax, because studies are showing now that the ultra-rich are the ones that are spending money. So they would be paying a big part of the sales tax. Those are my two comments, and I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Sure, yeah, just first on the shelter costs, when I said that now it's 31% of the budget, this is coming from the Survey of Household Spending, and I think they include basically all those different parts that you mentioned. Basically, utility bills, rent, and mortgage payments are all kind of part of that definition. On the sales tax issue, yeah, sure, I'll just say quickly, yeah, I mean, Alberta is certainly an outlier, being the only one without a sales tax, but sales taxes can be not as progressive as some other forms of taxes. Wealth taxes, progressive income taxes are much more targeted at the highest earners than a sales tax, which is going to affect low income and working Canadians quite a lot as well.
I think part of that calculation on the sales tax is that if we were to make our system way more progressive now and actually increase the interest rates at the top, there are unmonitored and unenforced tax loops that would stop those at the top from actually paying a higher tax rate, right? There's leakage, we lose there. So if we were to move to make our tax system more progressive, we have to improve enforcement of that tax system and actually do the work to close the loopholes, right? On the sales tax, I mean, it's pretty straightforward that somebody who's struggling to make ends meet is spending pretty much 100% of their income. So they're getting taxed pretty much on 100% of their income. And the wealthy are spending just a small portion of their income, and that's all they're getting taxed on when you resort on a sales tax. So if we need to, in a transition to a progressive system with enforceable tax rates at the top, then sure, let's do that short term. But I think the end goal needs to be fair, just, and progressive taxation.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up an interesting issue around the set of tax tools you have and how you apply them. And understanding that people right now are experiencing an incredible affordability crunch and an incredible tax burden that we need to be attuned to, right? And so it's about what tax tools are people ready to talk about right now. And I think that people feel so burdened that they want to talk about taxing the ultra-rich. And that makes sense, because that's really who's not being taxed well right now at all. And there's tools that specifically target them. And those, I think, are the tools we first go for. And then you can apply sales tax potentially with exemptions around essential goods, which a lot of provinces do, if you need to add to your general tax tools. But I think the first goal, first priority are the ultra-rich taxes.
You got one more, and then we'll move to some other speakers. So go ahead up there.
Hi, my name is Bob Turner, and I really appreciate this event today. I've got a concern that hasn't been mentioned in a couple of sort of tax innovations or tax maneuvers that you might consider. One of the concerns I have is this move now to increase the percentage of GDP that we're applying to military procurement. Basically, it's a doubling of the rate according to GDP, and this will further disrupt it. It will have the same effect as a supply chain issue or even the tariffs in the sense of discombobulating the public accounts. I also think that we should be talking about putting the capital gains tax up to at least 65%, if not 75%. This is a wealth tax, and it is something that we had in the past. It penalizes only those who are sort of speculating, in my opinion. We have to be careful about application of it to farms and businesses, but there are ways to attenuate that by applying capital gains in that sense too, on a kind of a per year basis or something along those lines. The third thing that I want to mention that I didn't hear tonight, but I think is important tax fairness, is basic income. And a universal basic income would attenuate a lot of the issues that we're hearing about, things of affordability, in my opinion.
I have a question. I thank you so much for raising capital gains particularly, and I just want to focus in on that, and then maybe we can comment on the other stuff as well. I'm just curious here, because the capital gains conversation was very heated in the last year. How many of you were involved in conversations with family members that hated the capital gains tax increase? You raise your hand if any of you had that experience, because I did. I talked to multiple people who thought for sure that they were going to get caught by that capital gains tax increase that was proposed. None of you guys had that? Okay, I see a couple willing to raise their hand on that. It was, maybe they're just raising their hand to be nice. At least from our perspective at Canadians for Tax Fairness, we spent more time trying to explain to people how they weren't caught than time really talking about all the benefits that this would cause. It felt like sometimes, because there was such a great misunderstanding about it. And so it shows us that we need to have conversations with people around taxes that really start at a very basic what taxes mean for them, and how taxes impact them, and who they think needs to pay more, and then start to present the tools like capital gains. Because you're right, it's a wealth tax. It's a tax on wealth, and you can design it very specifically to make sure it really only gets the very, very rich, right? But what happened with that is the conversation didn't happen with Canadians before the rule was imposed. And so there is all this space for misunderstanding. So I know I'm looking, I can feel like I'm looking at a bunch of activists in this room, right? And so we know, right? Like, what do we need to do in order to make something like capital gains tax be something that's more publicly supported? We need to have the basic conversations first.
Are you implying that the federal government communicated something poorly?
They didn't tell you. I mean, we're the organization on Canadians for Tax Fairness. We found out something might be coming 2 days before. We're like, what is it? What is it? So, I mean, they didn't communicate with anyone, which is a shame. You probably want to talk about the last point, I would assume, basic income.
Sure. Just quickly on the capital gains. Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely need to keep pushing on this because it's super disappointing that the Liberals and the left seem to have just accepted Pierre Poilievre's narrative of extra tax and they've all backtracked on it now. And yeah, On the basic income, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, there's I think a lot of different ways. You know, we can also think about employment guarantees, especially in the case of a just transition and transitioning away from certain jobs. Yeah, we're going to need the revenue to fund it. So if we want to be able to implement something like that, we're going to need to tax the billionaires and the ultra wealthy in order to fund something like that. And then just quickly on the military spending, I think you're right to be concerned about that, and that's why we need to keep pushing and highlighting what this money should be used for, right? When we're raising this tax revenue, we don't want to just give the government a blank check to send all that money to the military. So we need to be continuing to connect the increased tax revenues to the policies for social services and housing that we want to be funding with it.
I was thinking 2% GDP for housing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're going to take a pause on the questions. I know there's a couple more. We'll come back for more questions. I am now going to invite, though, one of our special guests, Brad LaFortune, Executive Director of Public Interest Alberta and Radical Soup Maker, to come down and just give us a little bit of talk about what PIA is doing and some of the work you guys are doing. If, sure, Shar, can you grab that? Just wait for the mic.
I don't know what. Just wait for the mic. By the way, I'm a banker, not an activist.
A banker?
Yeah, just kidding. I just want to say a couple things. I'm Brad from Public Interest Alberta. We've been working on things like people's budget in advance of the provincial budget. And one of the things that we want to start a conversation about on tax fairness is resource revenue sharing with Indigenous communities and First Nations. We think that's really important in terms of DEI. I know we don't say that word in the university anymore, but when it comes to equity, we need to have that conversation to have it now. And the other piece is, when I think about taxation and sort of the way that we can think about sustainability, it's not just for the next tax year for me, but it's also the long term for future generations as well. So we talk about oil well liabilities in this province, for example, cleaning up the oil sands. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. And we have this oil well liability program that is what is it? I mean, 1% of what we need, 2% of what we need in the long term. So I'm really concerned about that conversation. But the other thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is that the work that we're trying to do, we're polling people, they do say we want to increase in corporate taxes, we don't think the taxation system is fair. But it's almost you're right, it's sort of it can't be done, political will isn't there. One of the things that we're kind of starting to tap into, I think, is in rural and remote communities, the lack of compliance and enforcement by the provincial government on oil and gas companies is really pissing communities off out there. They have a below the drill campaign from Rural Municipalities Association that says that they're out over the last several years $334 million in municipal revenue, right? Not to mention landowners themselves. So I think the missing piece for me, and maybe it's just me talking, is that righteous populist anger. And that's where the political will is going to come from. And I think it's there, but we just gotta tap into it. And then one question I had for you is, where did the Robin Hood tax thing go?
The Robin Hood tax thing?
Robin Hood tax from 2010, they were talking about tax on trades essentially.
Oh.
Remember that movement?
Right. Yeah. It's still around.
It's still there. Okay.
It's
cool.
still around.
Great. Sorry for not coming up front, but yeah, thanks so much. Anyway, come to our conference too.
When is it?
March 27, 28.
How do we register?
Go to our website. Michael always has to do this to me. PIAalberta.org. It's at the Barnett House. We got some great speakers, and it's going to be really good. It's focused on training for municipal elections, as well as sustainability and our advocacy as well. So talking about how we can support each other in these really, really, really perilous times. So yeah, come on, call all. If you can't buy a ticket, get in touch with us at PA because we'd love to sponsor your ticket as well. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. Do you guys want to add anything to what Brad just said?
Do you want to talk at all about the Robin Hood tax? No. I mean, the Robin Hood tax it's yet another tool of the idea. This is the tax on trading in the finance markets, and it makes sense because so much of our economy has become financialized. Silas just wrote another great research paper on the financialization of housing and how our housing market has become financialized and what that's done as far as increasing rent and creating basically unaffordable housing. And our tax system is aiding and abetting that. And so we should look for tax tools that turn the channel on that. And taxing trading is one of those ways of doing it. I mean, it's, you know, the tax system is a way, it's a tool that we have to start to ratchet down some of the incredible power that these large corporate entities have gained over our economy and therefore our society, and redistribute it back into the things that we want to invest in. That's really what it's there for. That's the mechanism of it. And if we can help, you know, our communities understand that better and add some of that fury that we need to, damn it, this isn't working right and they shouldn't get away with this, I think we can win this, because I think the public supports the idea of a balanced and fair tax system. It's a Canadian value, for crying out loud, right? Fairness, and I think people want it applied to the tax system too.
Awesome. So I think we're going to take a couple more questions, and then I'm going to ask Emma to come down and give us a little bit of a chat as well. So right down here, or where did you, oh, you went over there. Okay, go ahead.
I thank all the speakers for coming here tonight to put this event on. Thank you. Now, you're talking about political will. Now, when this last proposed increase in capital gains came out, I actually made the effort to read who it would affect and by how much. And I personally thought, great, I wish it was a lot more, but great. And then suddenly this avalanche of everybody's going to pay came out, and it stuck. And it didn't seem like there was any pushback from government, from investment sector, from anybody. It seems like everybody just said, okay, this will get us clicks, we'll go with this, to hell with the truth. So how do we make headway on convincing people to think about their morals and what they want for their money in their taxes? How do you make headway when everybody thinks they're a temporarily dispossessed millionaire and they don't want to see the people who can afford to pay more? What do we do?
Super tricky. Anybody else want to answer that one? I mean, I'll give you a couple of confounding factors of that. And this comes with conversations we've had in communities, but also focus groups that have been done, that when we talk about taxing the rich, most people are like, yeah, tax the rich. But wait a second, am I going to be one of the rich someday? Does that mean you're going to tax me? So there's a weird cognitive dissonance that happens there. And the only way around it that I see is by really getting people to talk about the stark reality of their life right now and what they need right now to help get through this, and how the tax system can help. And I think that that's how we get people past this. The capital gains thing, I mean, quite frankly, you know, Canadians for the most part got the wool pulled over their eyes on that one, and there wasn't enough time to battle it back. Had we had a government that was willing to stay the course and not go into its own internal chaos, we could have won. I do believe we could have won that one, and I think we were getting there. And I think that we shouldn't give up, as Silas said. I think we need to come back at that and continue to push it.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hadley. I was going to ask a question related to the financialization of housing. So it's my understanding that higher inequality fuels higher asset prices, like housing, and it's kind of like a bad cycle. And specifically with housing, our real estate industry right now is like going crazy. It's become our biggest industry in Canada. As far as I understand, 40% of new investment in Canada goes to housing, goes to real estate. Sorry, not housing. So not even construction, just like buying and selling housing, which is not productive. Which is like, it's not an investment that benefits the economy really, or benefits anyone other than people who own the house. And housing overall has become more financialized, with I think around half of Edmonton's primary rental units, like big apartments, rental apartments, being owned by real estate investment trusts. It's been very, financed. I think we have double the national average of financial housing units, and that's driven by like lack of rent controls and that sort of thing, in Edmonton specifically. But I'm curious about if you could walk me through some of the ideas or the ways you could address that specifically through taxation. Because it's really annoying since real estate, and especially like these apartments, it seems so easy to address because they're built on, they're built on land, which is clearly and lasted good. But there has, there's not really much talk about like how we tax them specifically. I know there was an apartment tax in Edmonton. I think it was in place about 50 years or something, and it got recently, not recently, a year ago or something, taken down, which sucked because now like regular property owners have to pay on the tax burden of the city. I know that you voted against it, which is good. I guess it was something which is good. But I'm just curious, like how do we address that massive growth in housing, financialization, and how we can like target that specifically?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great question. Thank you. A couple things that we put forward in the fall included, you talked about REITs. That's one pretty easy solution that the government has been considering for a while, is just closing the REIT loophole, right? Currently, the tax system allows real estate investment trusts to not pay any corporate income taxes. And so this is a huge loophole that has driven the massive growth. This is why they're so popular for investors, because they are very profitable as an asset. If we were simply to close that loophole, that would be a big disincentive to financialized landlords and asset managers just getting into that industry, right? And REITs are a big problem because often what they're doing is just buying up existing housing, maybe renovating it to be able to rent it out at a higher price, right? They're not really the ones who are primarily driving building new housing. Another thing is capital gains, honestly, that we were very hopeful that the increase in the capital gains tax would help discourage financialized investors from getting into the housing market, because one way they can profit not only from rents, right, but they can also profit if the value of their land and their building goes up, right? They get a huge tax break when they go to sell that building. 50% currently, they thought about closing it to a third. Now it's probably gonna be back and stay at a 50% tax break, right? So these are mechanisms that are built into the tax system that are encouraging financial investors to buy up existing housing, right? And we don't have to leave those incentives in there. And in fact, we can go the other way and disincentivize it. And we can put in regulations that say, investors can cap the number of units that people can own, right? That could be a huge way to deflate housing prices. And then if we are able to raise revenue through closing these tax loopholes, investing in non-market housing, right? I think that's also been a huge thing that's allowed rents and housing prices to go up so much, is that there's no other option, right? People don't have a non-market option and are forced to pay these higher rents. So we need to reinvest in social housing so people don't have to rely on market housing.
Awesome. I think I saw two more questions, Shar. Can we take those last two in a row, and then I will let you guys wrap it up, and we'll move on to the next speaker. So go ahead.
Goes a race to the bottom with corporate income tax. And I think that our politicians have always said, well, it'll be a flight of capital if we keep our income tax at a reasonable level, they'll leave the country. And that would probably apply to the same as the wealth tax, because those with multi-million in assets have an easy path to move that money out of the country and not pay our tax. So how do you manage that wealth and capital flight?
Awesome. And the other one is just up 2 rows back, I think, from that one. Was there another question back there? Or?
There's one more?
Nope.
No?
All right, we'll wrap it up then. Go ahead with that one.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. We get that question all the time, for sure. So I think the two things I'll say to that. One is that, quantitatively, when this has happened in the past, if you look at studies, it's usually a pretty minor phenomenon. Not to say that it never happens, but Canada's a great country to live in. A lot of people want to live here, so they're not necessarily just going to get up and leave if they have to pay a bit more in taxes. The other thing is that there's policies that we can put in place to prevent it, right? So there's things like exit taxes that we can say, oh, well, if you're going to leave the country right after we put this policy in, we're going to take half your wealth or something like that. That's something we can do. We can use policy to do that. And I forgot the last thing I was going to say. Do you want to jump in?
Well, maybe you'll remember it while I talk. You'll be like, Katrina, you should say this, and then you'll say it. We always get this. We always get, and I think that we're in danger of getting this much more now with Trump in power because of the corporate tax cuts that he wants to extend, that he put in place in 2017, that he wants to extend. But I was around on this issue in 2017 when that happened, and one of the arguments that was made by bankers at the time was Canada should not try to meet those corporate tax cuts because Canada's got a lot more to offer than just a good tax rate. We've got a stable society, we've got a public health care system, we have a good education system, and in fact, this is what draws investment. And I think that that's the arguments that we need to start making really strongly, is that the way that we decide to gain tax revenue and invest it publicly, it is what is going to drive the kind of productivity we need in our society that's going to make it more sustainable and is going to be more inclusive. The kind of productivity that we actually all share in, instead of it just going to the top 1%. It is a conversation that is not something you have in 30 seconds with someone. And it is a conversation we need to invest in our communities. So I just implore all of us to be ready to have that conversation with people about what it really means to take back our economy into democratic hands and how the tax system helps us do that. If a big, massive multinational corporation decides that it's going to move its headquarters somewhere else, if we tax it properly and then use that tax revenue to actually invest in community development, I think we win, frankly, in local community economic development. That's my guess. So I'll leave it there.
Awesome. So now I will invite our friends from Common Horizons Edmonton to come up and tell us about their current campaign and get us all mobilized. Just, there you go. You each got one. Yeah.
We don't need the chairs. Yeah. Okay. Well, we won't be here for very long. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here tonight, to join all of you, and to see so many familiar faces in the crowd. My name is Emma. And we're organizers with a local organization called Common Horizon. But Common Horizon is actually a national organization that is organizing young workers specifically to tackle climate change and the affordability crisis. So you might be wondering, why young workers? Why is that the base that we have identified and that we are really taking responsibility for? The reality is, if you look around this room, if you kind of listen to what has been brought up by the speakers this evening, young people, Gen Z and millennials, are being disproportionately squeezed in this moment. Housing is further and further beyond reach for so many of us. And yet, the cost of living means that these workers are disproportionately being squeezed in such a way that it's hard for them to even really recognize and start to actually wield their power, whether that's within their workplaces or in their communities. Gen Z and millennials are also the single largest voting bloc in this country, and increasingly, because of these really harsh material conditions, they are being courted by the far right in incredibly effective and deeply concerning ways, when historically we would be able to count on young people as being disproportionately, like a progressive force within this country. And so we're here tonight because we have actually, for almost the past year, been running a campaign called Make Them Pay, which is a campaign that is being run all across the country. We have 6 chapters that are firmly rooted and established, and many more that are starting to build. And that has been campaigning for an excess profits tax on Canada's largest corporations, including big oil and big grocers. Because we understand that we're in a political moment where all of these corporations have been making record profits off of the backs of workers and everyday people. And as part of that campaign, we've actually been going door to door in Edmonton. We've talked to hundreds of Edmontonians, whether that has been at their doorsteps or outside of farmers markets. And I can say that I have never once organized on a campaign that has led people to just grab a clipboard out of my hands more quickly than this campaign. It is true that people are excited, they're behind this demand. They understand that the system is rigged against them and that ultra-wealthy corporations are getting away with it. Across the political spectrum, people are excited by this. I think the polling shows that, but we also know that it shows at the doorsteps, and that's ultimately where we're going to be able to build power, is by talking to people who don't necessarily already agree with us, who aren't necessarily out, in these spaces joining us, but who are actually with us and who do understand that the system is rigged against them. So I'm going to pass it over, and actually, just before I do, I just want to shout out Canadians for Tax Fairness. Almost our entire, canvassing script, our frequently asked questions is like pulled directly from their research and work, and has been like so incredibly invaluable in that campaign. For the most part, we're a bunch of young people who don't have all the time to be exactly what % are we asking for and how much money would it yield and so on and so forth. And so having people, behind the scenes doing that work is truly incredible. So yeah, thank you guys. Roisin.
Yeah, so as we're working on our Make Them Pay campaign, we do have your contact information, so you might be hearing from us. We don't send too many emails, but you can learn more about our campaign and what we're doing. And specifically, we have next week on March 10th, we have an info session. And for that info session, we're specifically looking for people under 40. But in general, we are, I know it's a bit of we're trying to get the young folk, I know, but we still welcome any and all help for canvassing and door knocking, but for membership specifically. And yeah, we are also, after this, going to Sherlock's for a beer if you want to learn more about us. And I have a little sign-up sheet for our info session, and I just hope we get to see more of you throughout the year, the next few months, and I think that's all.
Yeah, I just want to add and lift this up again. So if you registered for this event, we have your contact information. Again, you're not going to be inundated by emails, but we will send out things like when we're going canvassing next, and we would love for everyone, regardless of age, to join us. It's incredibly, Roisin and I were talking as we came in, there's never a single time that I go door knocking where I don't want to throw up and hide in my bed and would rather do literally anything in that moment before going. And yet, by the end, it is unbelievably empowering and exciting to know how many people are actually on our side and are willing and wanting to see the solutions that we're fighting for. We're in a moment of profound, I think, political despair and cynicism, and it's hard not to get held there. And I think the single best thing that we can do is actually reach out and talk to strangers. So encourage you to join us. The info session will be at our office downtown, so if you sign that form, we'll email you with more information about the time and the location. It's at 5:30 on Monday evening. Sorry, I turned it off.
I got to tell you, the groups like Parkland and Canadians for Tax Fairness, it's really great to talk with group of folks like this, but that's the dream. When somebody's taking the resources and the research and the work you're doing and putting it into action, going out and talking to people and moving minds. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for the work you're doing. Sign up if you didn't officially register for the event. I just want to say one more quick round of thank yous to Canadians for Tax Fairness for starting your tour here in Edmonton with us and coming to share your information with us. The folks who participated in organizing the event, Parkland Institute, Councillor Michael Janz, Oxfam Canada, Public Interest Alberta, and Common Horizons Edmonton. One more quick shout out to our funders, NUPG, the Canadian Labour Congress, United Nurses of Alberta, Edmonton District Labour Council, and the Alberta Federation of Labour. Thank you to all of you for braving this ridiculous building and finding your way to us. I know there were twice as many more people still wandering around out there somewhere. And maybe we'll see some of you 2 blocks over at Sherlock's for a beer with Common Horizons Edmonton. Any final words from you folks?
No. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions.
If I may, I forgot it in my speaking notes, but one other just totally bizarre thing. When we were talking about getting exploited by big oil in Alberta, the second thing that exploits us is big oilers. And I'm not sure if you followed in the provincial budget, but the province of Alberta gave potentially a big chunk of money to Edmonton, but on the condition that it's agreed upon between 3 parties, the province of Alberta, the city of Edmonton, and the Oilers Entertainment Group. Now, I'm going to be sharing more about this as it comes forward. I urge you, if you're not already, I have a newsletter, just michaeljanz.ca/newsletter. There's some pamphlets at the back. Sign up, I'll be sharing more about this because this really is what we're talking about. One of the richest people in Alberta, Darryl Gates, a billionaire, owns the Oilers Entertainment Group, and we're in a situation where our tax dollars, hundreds of millions of tax dollars, are again, just like the arena, going to be funneled into a real estate project and an event park, like a fan park. This has nothing to do with hockey. Nothing to do with saving our beloved hockey team. Nothing to do with this. It's straight up a real estate deal. And I really hate and resent the fact that the Premier has said, this is it, Edmontonians, take the money and let Darryl have his money or nothing for you. That's ridiculous. So sign up, there'll be more there. Thank you again. Where is this Sherlock Holmes pub, Emma? Is it just 2 blocks that way? Yes. Wow, that sounds exciting. Do you think we could all fit? Yes. Wow, I want to go make new friends.
I'll be going to Sherlock.
Oh,
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone.